Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. If you've been paying attention to the news cycle today, you've probably seen um, that there's been an investigative report and documentary surfacing around some Hollywood high flyers, and specifically the long overdue exposure of Jared Leto and his literal cult following, aka the Echelon, as well as a trail of severe allegations spanning decades. So let's get into this. People look at a man in flowing white robes standing on a private island surrounded by hyper devoted fans treated like disciples, and they say, how does anyone fall for that? How does a person get away with this for 15, 20 years? They call it shocking. I call it structural. Because the leap from a high profile Hollywood messiah exploiting high school age girls under the guise of artistic enlightenment to the random guy sitting on a TikTok live in 2026 behaving like an entitled boundary stepping creep is not as wide as you think. It is the exact same blueprint. One just has a PR team and a private island, the other has a ring light and zero self awareness. Today, we are dissecting the psychology of cult tactics, predatory grooming, and the absolute refusal of modern men to practice basic gentlemanly conduct. We're going from the macro level Hollywood manipulation down to a real life micro interaction that happened on my screen just last night. So grab yourself a drink and let's unpackage all of this. So let's start at the top. This is a pyramid, okay? The aesthetic of absolute authority. When you watch the footage of 30 Seconds to Mars as Mars Island retreats, or look at how Leto has curated his image over the last decade, you aren't looking at a random eccentric rock star behavior. You are looking at a classic textbook cult tactic. Cult dynamics don't require an actual religious doctrine. They simply require a charismatic figure who understands how to leverage power, isolation, and psychological vulnerability. So here is how that machinery works, okay? Number one, the Messiah devotee dynamic. By adopting literal Christ like imagery, white robes, long hair, performative guru gestures, the leader subtly installs a subconscious hierarchy. He isn't just a musician or an actor, he is an enlightened being. When you establish yourself as untouchable, normal human rules, moral boundaries, and law no longer apply to you in the eyes of your followers. This leads to number two, manufactured isolation and vulnerability. The allegations coming to light highlight a consistent pattern targeting young women, often teenagers aged 16 to 17, who are shy, impressionable, or seeking validation. Why? Because an established, well adjusted woman in her 30s is going to see right through that act. A teenager seeing an Oscar winner or a famous rock star validate her existence is easily entirely disarmed. Number three is calculated power plays. Former insiders described how girls would be brought into private spaces, told to sit in a chair, and deliberately ignored for 15 minutes while he established dominance. That is Mind Games 101. Create anxious anticipation, make them desperate for your attention, and then drop a rude remark to lower their self esteem. Number four is weaponized fan culture and NDAs, non disclosure agreements. So, when you turn a fan base into a pseudo religious sect like the Echelon, the fans become your personal border guards. They attack whistleblowers, suppress victims, and label any legitimate accusation as a quote unquote smear campaign. Top that off with trying to force 16-year-olds to sign NDAs after the fact. That isn't a rock star lifestyle. That's systematic self preservation of a predator. Everything sex related in these structures isn't actually about sex, it's about power. It's about control, and it relies entirely on normalizing boundary erosion piece by piece until the victim doesn't even realize how far past the red line that they've been pulled. And that first thing I said, everything sex related in these structures isn't actually about sex, it's about power, is a paraphrased bit of a quote that Jared said himself in an interview. And that should be a red flag that everyone should pay a lot of attention to. So, it also is important to note that this is a man who owns Mars Island, the private island where he hosts these retreats for the Echelon. And also that his presentation and the way that he chooses to kind of lean into it like it's almost a joke, it really makes you sit back and wonder, why does this man also own Laurel Canyon Military Compound? What is the purpose of his involvement with Laurel Canyon? Which brings me to Laurel Canyon itself. If you don't already know about Laurel Canyon, this is something that you should look up. In fact, there is a book I just talked about a few months ago, in the last year even, about Laurel Canyon and some of the things that occurred there and how they correlated with the music scene and Hollywood. And knowing that Jared Leto owns this property now, in addition to Mars Island, is very interesting information, if you ask me, especially as you compare it to other former cult leaders in the past and things like Epstein Island. The parallels are uncanny. So now people have to look, further under the scope on this, because looking at what we are just here and the little bits I've talked about is already causing several red flags to pop up. And pattern recognition is something that we are all capable of doing if we start actually paying attention to our surroundings. And people love to look at extreme examples like Hollywood cults and comfort themselves by thinking, well, that's extreme. Normal men don't act like that, except they do. The mindset is identical. The entitlement is identical. The only difference is the scale. And I guess I should really say this isn't really normal men, but this is what has been normalized. A case in point example. Last night I was hanging out on a friend's live stream. She had a male co-streamer on screen with her. During the stream, my friend and her co-streamer started talking about a mutual friend of ours who was sitting in the chat and is a single woman. I am too. My friend was casually trying to play matchmaker, seeing if we could find a nice, genuine gentleman for our mutual friend. Now remember, the co-streamer is a taken man. He has a girlfriend. Out of nowhere, this dude decides to chime in with, "It ain't me. I got a girl," and immediately follows up with, "Hold on, let me go see what she looks like." Excuse me? I didn't waste a single second. I popped straight into that conversation and shut it down immediately. You aren't a gentleman if you got a chick and then go look. You shouldn't even be looking. And who said you were in the consideration to begin with? You're not. Look, I am that bitch. I will call out a shithead man before any of my friends even thinks about considering his ass every time. Because let's analyze what actually just happened in that micro interaction. First, self-centering entitlement. Two women were having a conversation about setting up their friend. Nobody asked him, nobody offered him, nobody considered him. But because he is a man with an ego, he instantly assumed he had to clarify that he wasn't an option while simultaneously asserting his right to inspect the merchandise, quote unquote, on the internet. 2 is the fake nice guy disguise. He tried to play it off like, oh, I'm loyal. I have a girlfriend, but let me check out her profile. That is trash ass behavior. A man who is genuinely taken, respectful, and operating as a true gentleman does not peek at single women on the internet while lightly reminding everyone that he has a woman at home. Number 3 is the disrespect to his partner. If you have a girlfriend, why are you using your platform on a public stream to browse other women's photos under the guise of quote unquote curiosity? It's disrespectful to your girl, it's disrespectful to the woman in the chat, and it's disrespectful to the space. Guys like that love to hide behind the excuse of, oh, I was just playing. It's just Riz. No, it's not Riz. It's fucking stupid, immature, boundary pushing behavior, and it needs to end, full stop. This brings me to a broader issue of ungentlemanly conduct in modern social settings. Why do we connect a Hollywood cult leader to a random guy acting out on TikTok? Because both stem from the exact same cultural disease, the belief that men are entitled to women's attention, space, and access at all times, regardless of their status. A true gentleman operates with boundaries, integrity, and situational awareness. A taken man does not glance at single women like he's browsing a menu. A taken man does not insert himself into women's conversations to frame himself as a potential option or a prize. And a gentleman understands that when he is simply an observer in a space, he should not become the main character. What we saw with the Leto accusations, making young girls call him daddy, forcing NDAs, establishing bizarre power hierarchies, is the absolute extreme end of ungentlemanly predatory behavior. But it gets normalized when society lets minor boundary violations slide in everyday life. When society laughs off the guy on the live stream who disrespects his girlfriend to go peek at a single woman's profile, when we excuse men centering themselves in spaces where they don't belong, when we label subtle disrespect as harmless banter or Riz, we build a culture where men believe they are immune to accountability. And when those men gain wealth, fame, or a mic, that unchecked entitlement mutates into full-blown exploitation. Gentlemanly conduct isn't dead because chivalry went out of style. It's dying because women are expected to tolerate trash-ass behavior under the guise of that's just how guys are. Not on my watch. Whether it's calling out an industry predator hiding behind a pair of white robes and a pseudo-spiritual fan base, or checking a random guy on a co-stream who forgot how to act like a loyal partner and a respectful adult, the standard has got to be held. If you have a girlfriend, then act like it. Stop peeking, stop inserting yourself, and stop assuming you are the prize in every room you walk into. You're not. To my ladies listening, keep your boundaries high. Protect your friends from low effort men and never be afraid to be that bitch who speaks up when someone brings something that looks like bullshit. If you smelling it, that means there's a problem. That's it for today's episode of the Mind of Sai Marie. If you've noticed any of these kind of things happening, I'd love to hear from you. Let's talk about how daily boundary pushing is overlapping with larger predatory behavior, such as the sharking phenomenon and trend that's ongoing. And if you haven't already heard about that, I suggest you look it up and learn how to protect yourselves. Continue talking about these things. Don't forget to subscribe. Share this episode with a friend who needs to hear it. And I'll see you back here the next time on the Mind of Sai Marie. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, hold the line, and remember, the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell.